Hello and welcome to another Delboy's Gaming History. I've always wanted to do a series where I talk about the games that I played back in the day, but I've also, because I've seen lots and lots of videos where we talk about those games, I wanted to bring a little bit of history into it, a little bit of background information into either the game and the hardware, but also the things that were going on in the world, and specifically things that influenced me. So there will be several in this series, not always based around arcade games. They can be games that were around on the computers or the consoles that I owned at the time. So what we're going to have in these particular videos all the time is a batch of information. What we will have over here is possibly some gameplay or the marquee screen. Over here we will have some cue cards about the machine or about the game itself, and then down here at the bottom there'll be some pictures of the events that were going on at the time, and most of this information will come from diaries that I kept. I started writing diaries in the late 70s, and every year I've started off a diary, and on I've filled them in. So I've got lots of information that I can go back on. The rest of the information will come from events and the internet. So in this particular video we're going to be concentrating on one year, which is 1987, and the game that I've chosen for this particular one is Wonder Boy in Monsterland, the arcade version. But we'll start off with the electronics of the time, the stuff that I had in my possession. So at this particular stage I had a Commodore 64 still, although this was the final year of me owning a Commodore 64 until I bought one later on in life. That is because a couple of years earlier, and as mentioned possibly in an earlier version of this gaming history, I got an Amiga 1000, and that Amiga basically, being so brand new, meant that there wasn't much around for it, so my Commodore 64 sort of merged in with my Amiga 1000. But the one thing I can say about my Amiga history is it went on for years, and I kept up to date with my Amiga for quite a substantial amount of time up until the late 80s. And this one is no different in the fact that my Amiga 1000 was just about to get upgraded in the early part of next year. What that is upgraded to will be in a follow-up video. But at work, where was I now? So I'd left school, I'd finished a YTS, I was now working as a fruit and veg senior operative at Summerfield Superstore. I don't know if many people can even remember Summerfield, because I think they were bought by the Co-op at the end of this decade, but I worked for them for about a year and a half. This was the final year of me working for them. I had to get up early in the morning. I was at work for 5:30 a.m. and finished around about 2-3 in the afternoon, and such weird shifts meant that I missed an awful lot of what my friends were doing, because I was in bed for 7 or 8 in the evening, so that I could get up at 5:30 in the morning, to get up for work at 5:30, and all of that time I was walking down to work as well, so I was setting off quite early. But I did finish at that place, and the next place I worked for was a plastics firm in my town, and I was a dispatch operative. What does that basically mean? Well, I worked in the dispatch department, but I had several jobs. One of them was using reach trucks. I don't know if anybody knows what a reach truck is, but it's a very big forklift where you stood in a cage inside it, and it moved up and down so that you could reach high up shelves. That's because these plastics that I was getting orders ready for were in sewn up bags. rubble type sized bags, and that's because they created all sorts of things like rubber bungs for the bottom of ladders, plastic moldings for office desks, all sorts of cable tidies and all sorts of stuff. So I started with them at the latter part of this year and carried on working for them for about a year or so, and then moved into what my career would eventually be, and we'll talk about that in later videos. So where did I play my games at? Well, if anybody's been following this series, you'll know that there's a pattern that we used to have a bus depot which had a cafe, and there was always a couple of video games there. We had a travelling fair every year in my town, so for 3 days of that year, I would be able to go and play on huge amounts of different video games. We had a taxi rank, so if I was out on the night one day and basically was a bit worse for wear and didn't want to walk home, the taxi rank would be a place where I could play a couple of arcade games. And family holidays sort of like weren't really there now that I was approaching adulthood. So I wasn't quite in my 20s. So there was one other place where I played arcade games and played them quite regularly, and I'm going to be talking about that when we get to the game side of things. So listen out for that. Now, what I usually talk about now is the films, the gadgets, and the music of the time. And now that I'm in my adult sort of like part of my life where I'm getting a wage and I can now go out drinking with my friends, I was going to the pictures 90% of the time every week. There were times where there wasn't a film that I wanted to see, but we also had video recorders, so I was getting out films for stuff that I wanted to watch during the early evening. So the films I'm going to mention here are not all of them. The 1980s was a boon for me for watching films. And if you can imagine, there are 52 weeks in a year, and I was going 90% of the time to the cinema. You can imagine I was going to the cinema a lot. But the films that come to mind just for this one, and there are many more which I'll mention in the same year a little bit later on in another video. The ones that come to mind are The Fly, Colour of Money, Little Shop of Horrors, Over the Top, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, Flight of the Navigator, Three Amigos, Evil Dead 2, Lethal Weapon, Hellraiser, Untouchables, Roxanne, Inner Space, Spaceballs, Masters of the Universe. And if I was watching something on video, for those particular films that I didn't go to the cinema for, they would be things like Bigfoot and the Hendersons, Dirty Dancing, Fatal Attraction, Blind Date, An American Tail, and The Wraith. And like I say, there were many more videos, there were many more films. There is going to be more on 1987 in the future, and I'll mention some more when we get to there. When it comes to music, nothing much had changed. I was now still into my soundtracks and electronic music, but the type of bands and singles and albums that I were buying this list is not exclusive, but they would have included Starship, Madonna, Mel and Kim, Pet Shop Boys, Rick Astley, T'Pau, U2, Elton John, and Fleetwood Mac. And then there's a couple of firsts here. One of those firsts is there was a track that came out that I'm not embarrassed to say that I owned, but it's not something that I listen to anymore from the particular artist or band, and that was Star Trekking by The Firm. That was probably just because I was into Star Trek and space and all those science fiction type things. Another first was I went to London to see a Broadway production. This was at the Prince Edward Theatre near Soho, if anybody knows the area of Prince Edward, where the Prince Edward Theatre is. And I went and saw Tim and Rice's and ABBA's production of Chess. Now, I took a girl to go and see this. I'm not embarrassed to say this, but we went shopping, we walked around London. I got lost. Soho is not the best area to get lost in. I went into a store that had nothing in the windows. I didn't even know what type of store it was. It just said guidebooks above it. So I walked in and immediately walked out again because those guidebooks were sex guidebooks. It was a bit of an eye-opener. It was a joke that me and the girl that I took there had great fun talking about to our parents when we got home. But Chess was one of those ones that sort of amalgamated electronic music and musical in general, and I fell in love with that soundtrack. One Night in Bangkok is a fantastic track, and I still listen to it now. But another first for me was a track that I listened to when I was playing Wonder Boy in Monsterland. So I'm going to mention it now. I went with a friend to where he worked, and he worked on an Air Force base, an American Air Force base at that. And his job was fixing the arcade machines. He was big into electronics. And I was lucky enough to know him as a great friend. His name was Martin. And basically, he allowed me to go there once or twice a month. We'd go to special events like the Super Bowl. They'd have soul nights. And you could change your money from pounds to dollars and get totally sloshed. And we took turns in him driving us there or me driving him there, because at this particular time I did have a driving license, but it was only for an automatic driving car. So my uncle worked on a farm. I learnt to drive tractors at a very early age. I didn't learn to drive a manual car. I got a license for an automatic because I was working on the farms, and that allowed me to drive automatic cars only. So we were able to share the responsibility of getting to this place. The American Air Force Base was such an eye-opener for me. They had bowling there. Their chips and their hamburgers were Americanized. Everything about that Air Force Base was flown in from America, even the concrete slabs that made up. And it was called the BX Center. I'll never forget that either. And I had a fantastic time going to the Air Force Base. Anyway, the track I wanted to talk about, because I've gone off track, was from a band called Heart. And in 1987, they'd released a track in the States called Alone, which isn't really a new track at all, but I hadn't heard of it. Now, it went to number one, and basically when I was so taken aback by the piano part of it and the voice of Ann Wilson, that I did some research, and I found out that the track is actually a cover by, I think, a band called X10. But it had also been used in a drama in America called Dreams. And anyway, the track was very moving for me. It was one of those like power ballads, and I hadn't really gotten involved too much in power ballads. And it made me want to find out more about this band, and I found out that it was a couple of sisters, Ann Wilson, Nancy Wilson. Nancy Wilson tended to be more the musician playing the instruments, guitar and piano. They came from a very musical background. And then doing some more research, I found a couple of years earlier that Bernie Taupin, who did the lyrics for Elton John through all of his life, his musical career, wrote a track called These Dreams. And as soon as you've got two tracks under your belt and you're doing a little bit more research, you tend to then backtrack through their whole catalogue. and I was listening to tracks like Barracuda and oh, what comes to mind? Crazy on You, I think was another one. And I just fell in love with the band. And it was probably my inroads into more soft rock. I remember that there was a particular album that I'll put a picture of down below that I then started to play on my Walkman more and more to the point it nearly wore out. And the gadgets at the time. So usually I talk about toys, but now I'm in my late teens, approaching my 20s. I wasn't really, board games weren't really there. Tabletop type arcade games like Invader, Astro Wars, they were all now pushed to one side. But I do remember that I bought my last Sony Walkman in 1987. It was a model WM503 and it was grey. Loved it. I didn't buy another Walkman by Sony after this particular model, but I did buy another variant of it. I think it was a Philips brand, but I was moving now more to portable CD players. So the only things that I was listening to on tape now were in cars, when I was driving around in a car, because I couldn't afford CD players at that particular stage to go into things like cars and to travel around in. They were CD players that were in stacking systems. So, with all of that out of the way, we'll start talking about the events that were basically going on in that particular year. So, most of this comes from my diary, but of course it's also researched on the internet. And I remember on the 2nd of January that Enid Blyton replaced gollywogs with gnomes. This was quite a big thing. Even at school, I recognised that there was horrible languages being used at our foreign guests and migrants. Gollywog was something that I saw on jam jars, and my sister knew of them because Enid Blyton wrote about that particular type of thing in the children's storybooks. What they did was, to continue publishing those books, they replaced gollywogs with gnomes. So that was something that was definitely in my diary. This one wasn't in my diary, but I think it's a pretty big event. But on the 5th of January, Harold Macmillan, which was one of our prime ministers, he was buried at the age of 92 because he died on the 29th of December of the previous year. And my granddad always talked about Harold Macmillan. I didn't really understand what he was talking about, and I wasn't really that interested. But later on in life, at my sort of age, I sort of get the understanding of why Harold Macmillan was such a character. Something that wasn't in my diary, but is quite a big thing for this particular period. On the 11th of February, British Airways privatised on the London Stock Exchange. This is all part of Margaret Thatcher's marvellous plan of selling everything off that we've got good to foreigners to get money. So, British Airways, being totally British, was now on the stock exchange, so we could now own part of British Airways. The 12th of February, there is a horrible report that I couldn't believe. This again wasn't in my diary. Edwina Currie caused controversy by stating that good Christians won't get AIDS. Now, how this person can be of a civil servant for our land and come out with statements like that, I don't know. It's definitely a sign of the times that you can get away with saying just about anything, but hang your head in shame for saying something like that. This was a very big event for me. On the 16th of May, Coventry City won the FA Cup 3-2 against Tottenham Hotspur, and I was at Wembley for that game. I couldn't believe it when I got the tickets, and I managed to make the journey all the way there and watch that game in such a massive stadium. I'd followed Coventry City ever since my father took me to my first football game. which I'm sure I've talked about before, but just to give you a recap, he gave me two choices. Did I want to go to see Coventry or did I want to go and see Oxford? Because those are in slap bang in the middle of where I particularly live. I asked what colour was Coventry. He said blue. What colour was Oxford? He said yellow. I chose Coventry, and I've been a Coventry supporter ever since. And that's something that I'll always recap because I was very close to my father. On the 11th of June, Margaret Thatcher wins her third term as Prime Minister. Now, that's quite an important thing to talk about because there aren't many Prime Ministers in our history that win a third straight term. I believe she was lucky with some of the terms that she got. They were because of world events that were going on, Falklands being one of them. But she won her third term and the rest is history, as they say. On the 19th of October, we had Black Monday. Now, this might be called Black Tuesday in other newspapers, and that's because of where we are in the world, but this affected the world. And basically 50 billion was wiped off of the value of shares on that day. Various reasons why that occurred. I didn't really quite understand what those reasons were, but as soon as something like that happens, a recession generally nearly always follows. In October, for my particular history, a big event occurred in the fact that there was a part of the motorway that was being extended, and it would then join my hometown with a motorway that would make me be able to go down to London or get up to Birmingham very, very quickly. Otherwise, I had to use A and B roads. So the M40 was given a go-ahead for an extension. That took many years, and I did go to the opening of the M40, but it wasn't in this year. On the 18th of November, we had the King's Cross fire. Now, this is well known. A fire started on the escalator. It killed 31 people, and the London Underground was substantially changed for health and safety based on that fire. It was absolutely everywhere. It was a horrible event, and the pictures that were shown around the world just shows the devastation of what can happen with a fire when you have one underground. And then the last one again is very pertinent for my granddad. As I mentioned him previously before, he worked at the Peugeot factory. On the 10th of December, the Peugeot 405 was named European Car of the Year. And just a couple of months previous, they'd won the contract to build the 405 at the Coventry plant. So that was very good. And I do remember my granddad saying that the floor plan for where they built this radically changed because they were building two of the most prominent cars in the Peugeot range at that time. And lastly, we have on the 25th of December a record number of people tuned in on Christmas Day to watch a long-standing actress called Jean Alexander leave a favourite soap of this country called Coronation Street. She played a character called Hilda Ogden, and she'd played her for 23 years. And so that was a major event that went on that Christmas Day. So we now get to the game itself, and Wonder Boy in Monsterland is not something that a lot of people will come to mind, and it doesn't actually really come to mind either. This is really more about my friend Martin, who died basically this year, and the first thing I thought about in 1987 was me going to the American Air Force Base and him showing me his latest thing that he'd been working on, which was Wonder Boy in Monsterland, because Wonder Boy in Monsterland came as a kit. It's a conversion kit. It wasn't actually its own stand-in machine at this BX Centre. So he had to gut out a machine and build this machine pretty much from scratch. And we had many conversations about it because I was more into the other machines that were around there, which were things like Road Blaster and Flying Shark. Those were the games that I wanted to go on, but he was hooked on Wonder Boy in Monsterland, and he got me hooked on it as well. I still remember the discussions with him. I couldn't understand why he liked it, being as this Wonder Boy character was pretty much running around in a nappy for the start of the game. I couldn't understand why bricks were floating around. I mean, what are these platforms? Why are they magically moving up and down and left and right? And why are all these shops that he was going into to buy things to help him in some of the most dangerous places that you could ever go in this particular land? But those were the sort of like fun conversations that I used to have, and I used to have a dig at him for liking such a cutesy game that we could be playing on helicopters and tanks and shooting aliens. But I'll never forget Martin, and this game just brings back so many happy memories. So we're going to sort of like move on a little bit now and see some absolutely dodgy gameplay from me, and I hope that you enjoy it. I'm so sorry that I'm bad at this game, but I'll see you on the flip side, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to the gameplay side of this Delboy gaming history series. This one is Wonder Boy in Monsterland, and hopefully by now you've watched the beginning intro, which talks about 1987 and my familiarity with this game. Most of it was with my friend Martin, who I lost this year due to cancer. And basically, I've got very fond memories of this game. It's not my favorite. It's very fun. But enough about that. Let's see how I do, which probably is going to be not very well. So put a coin in, and we'll press the start button. Okay, just getting myself familiar. The controls. So that's jump. Brilliant. What you'll tend to find is there's lots of these shops around. I've only got 15, but they give you a sword straight away. And there's lots of these hidden things as well. It was great delight from my friend Martin telling me about all these secrets, and secrets were starting to become quite commonplace, even in our consoles and computers. So this one was no different. Do I want to buy any drinks? Not really. Kill that. Not doing too badly at the moment, although my heart could be better. What we got in here then? Oh, death. Ooh. Yes, got him. Marvelous. Yay! Round one done. Not too bad. Said I haven't played this game in a long time. Now I did have a Mega Drive, but I don't. Yeah, I didn't have a Master System, but I had a Game Gear. So I believe I had this for a very short period of time. But I did have an Amiga, and I do remember getting this game on the Amiga. I don't think I played the Commodore 64 version. I think I've moved on by that point, because those home ports came out at individual sort of times from between 1987 and 1989. So kill a few of these. Go up here. Now, my friend would have told you best of all what the boots do, but I think they let you cling to platforms a little bit better. So we will have them. Brilliant. That wasn't fair. Okay, 500 points. Extra time. Ooh, got a revival pill. Yep. Yay. Always find these cave sections always contain bats and things that are a pain in the arse. But we'll see how we go with this. Still, it's giving me my hearts back as I kill these things, so that's not too bad. Someone is there. Don't remember half of this. Oh, need bats again. Another door. Oh. He seems to be not too bad. Oh, until he did that. Oh, got it. And I've got a broadsword now. I don't think that'll make much of a difference to me. Okay, free gold. Is there any secrets? No, is there any? I'm useless at finding secrets. Oh. Now I do know that the shop's over there, but I've only got a few bit of gold, so I don't think there's any point in me trying those. That's typical. Oh. Got him. Good. Doing okay so far. Well, not making a pig's ear of it, I should say. Yay. What's in here then? Oh, goblin. Oh, what? Haha. See me dying in a minute. Look at that. What did I say? And with that, it's game over. And and this brought in the continue part of things. I don't think continue started too much earlier than 1987. I'd have to look into it, but I'm pretty sure it'd probably be about 85. But we will quit. I think we've seen enough. I just want to end Wonder Boy in Monsterland is one of those things where I was introduced to a game a little bit earlier probably than I would have done going back to my hometown, being as I wasn't going on holiday anymore. And the travelling fair would probably get this a year later after its release, so I would have seen it in 88 rather than in 87. So it was absolutely wonderful to be able to go to an American Air Force base and see many of these arcade games after this point earlier than I would have done normally. I really was jealous of people that lived near seasides where they would see these things a lot earlier than I would, and I relied therefore on home versions. This isn't a particular game that I've got fond memories for, other than it was my friend's first custom machine that he'd worked on, and he absolutely loved it. But from that, it's an absolutely lovely game to play, and I do recommend at least a go if you've got some type of emulation system that allows you to play it. And I think that really wraps things up. And thank you very much for watching. Until the next time. Bye bye.